now, please. So, ladies and gentlemen, when working on solving equations, and get your attention. So, when working on solving equations, all right, we always wanted to look into factoring. Right? We always try to factor. So, what I previously kind of taught you when trying to solve an equation, if you couldn't solve it, like since there's two x's, you can't just say get the x by itself, right? Because I have two of them. So what we worked on doing is, okay, if you can't solve it in a regular term, then Lenny, what you want to do is set it equal to 0, factor it, and then you can use the zero product property. So if I was going to do that, I'll subtract 25 on both sides. And what I get is x squared plus 12x plus 11 equals 0. But here comes the problem. You can't factor that, can you? You guys don't need to write that down. You can't factor that. Sorry. This is non-factorable, right? So we're going to learn how to do the quadratic formula, but at this point, we can't factor this using our another term. So what we have is there's another way we can look at this. So let's go back up to our original problem. It says using the square root method, and there's something that's very important about this. As this problem is written, this is a very important trinomial. Right. So this is what we call a perfect square trinomial. And you guys remember we've worked on seeing a lot of these perfect square trinomials. Why am I not wearing my thing?
We gotta restart.
Yeah, that's okay. So I'll just put it on. It might have been a little bit light. But so ladies and gentlemen, how can I factor this? Can I factor this? Remember, it's a perfect square trinomial. Does anybody remember? Yes. Yeah, it's going to be x is 6 and 6. So let's look at this. Main important thing, guys, to look at a problem. Whenever you have your last term as a square number, 9, 16, 25, 36, 49, 64, 81. Always look for square numbers. Try to see if it's a square number. Try to see if your middle term is double what your number, the square root of that is. So look at it. 6 times 6 gives you 36, right? Does 6 plus 6 give you 12? Yeah, so guess what? This is very easily factored. This is what we call a perfect square trinomial, because we can simply just write it like this. Right? Yeah, it's x plus 6 times x plus 6. 6 is the two factors. So you can just write that as x plus 6 squared. Here, let me factor it out so you guys can see this. X plus 6 times x plus 6 equals 25. Factoring it, it looks like this. Then I rewrite it as x plus 6 squared equals 25. Now, how do I solve? How many x's do I have? 1. There's only that 1 there. So I can use now my inverse properties. Or I can use my square root method, as they call it. Because now, since I only have 1x, I just undo what's happening to my variable. The first thing that's happening to my variable is it's what, Ronnie? What is happening to the variable? It's being squared, so you're going to want to square root it, right? I know. It's really confusing when you're not looking up here, too. Right? Okay. So here, you undo the squaring by taking the square root. So therefore, I'm going to have x plus 6 equals the square root of 25. Remember, when you introduce the square root, you have to make sure you include plus or minus. So therefore, I subtract 6 on both sides, and I get x equals negative 6 plus or minus 5. You can. So we're going to get to that in a second. So therefore, I have negative 6 plus or minus 5. So now, negative 6 plus 5 is negative 1. And negative 6 minus 5 is negative 11. Therefore, my two answers are x equals negative 1 and x equals negative 11. Make sense? Cool? Yes?
Why didn't you have to
Remember, you have to include. Because when you introduce the square root, we don't know if you're talking about positive 5 or negative 5. Because 5 times 5 gives you 25, and negative 5 times negative 5 gives you 25. So when you introduce the square root, you have to include both of them. Yes?
Why wouldn't you just subtract the 6 and 5
Huh?
+5?
You could do it. You could have just said positive 5 minus 6 is negative 1. negative 5 minus negative 6 is negative 11. I just kind of did an extra step because that's what I'm just used to doing it that way. Any other questions? OK, so what I'd like you guys to do, we don't have a lot of time.